For joining us, Mark.
Pleasure.
Oh, being recorded. Okay, Mark Hatt, right from IPAC. Thanks for joining us. And who else do we have here? Oh, Tracy joined. So thanks everyone for joining us, and welcome to day 2 of Research Week. I'm pleased to introduce our 2 speakers today. Dr. Simone Arbour, who's our recovery scientist here at Ontario Shores. Simone does a wealth of work in recovery at Ontario Shores, at some of our academic partners, as well as the implementation and evaluation of recovery colleges nationally with the Canadian Mental Health Association. She also does supports a number of evaluation activities across the center here. She's going to be co-presenting today with Holly Harris, who used to be our RAB coordinator and research assistant, but we lost her. She went over to work with Simone as the peer support specialist to support the implementation and evaluation of recovery colleges. So I'm done stealing their thunder. I'm going to pass it over now to Dr. Arbour and Holly. Welcome back, guys.
Okay, so yeah, actually, you probably did our next slide, which is awesome because we'll just roll along so Frank can soak up as much as possible. I just wanted to. It sort of dawned on me today, but because Holly and I take this for granted, actually, which is a good thing. But yeah, this whole co-production and mental health research for me started with recruiting Holly for some of the projects that we're going to talk about today. But so I'm proud that I work in a department where we do value the lived experience lens. We recruit for it, we select for it, and we leverage it. So that's me and Holly. So do you want to go to the next slide, Holly, and you can introduce yourself? And we're going to talk about co-production today. So I just sort of had this, we are the living example of that. So anyways, go on and introduce yourself, Holly.
Awesome. Thanks, Simone. So my name is Holly Harris. I know many of you, and I am now the post-secondary peer support specialist here at Ontario Shores. I have worked at Ontario Shores since 2018. As Simone mentioned, it's actually around my 3-year anniversary right now. So that's really exciting. I worked here in a variety of capacities. I started my career here as Simone's lived experience co-investigator on a project that we'll talk a little bit about today. And then, as Tim mentioned earlier, I was also the research ethics board coordinator. In my current role, I leverage my lived experiences with mental health challenges to inform the planning, development, and delivery of recovery college programming in post-secondary institutions, which is such a novel and innovative application of this recovery college philosophy. And coupled with this lived experience, my professional and academic experiences related to mental health research and critical disability studies are leveraged to ensure that the voices of those with lived experience are at the forefront of program development and delivery. So it's a real pleasure to be here with Simone to talk about something I'm so passionate about. So looking forward to today's conversation and presentation.
Perfect. So today, what we're hoping you'll get out of this is a good understanding of what co-production is, why it's important, especially in mental health. We're talking about research, but co-production is so valuable in any pursuit, really. And I think people are recognizing that. So we're trying to just also impress upon you guys, as I'm sure you know, why it is shifting this way, why it's so valuable, and then maybe thinking about how you can incorporate co-production in your own neck of the woods. And so the agenda is definition, of course, why it's important. We'll try to give you a couple of examples that are tangible, like you can understand and access them. And then we're hoping to, maybe, if we get enough people passionate about this to really look at where we currently are, listening to lived experiences, where do we need to go and how do we get there? So that's what we're hoping to do today. And so I'm gonna, we'll kind of go back and forth. So Holly, if you want to take it away from here, and then I'll jump in when I'm needed as well.
Absolutely. So the first thing that we'll just talk a little bit about is what is co-production. I'm sure all of you have heard this word. It's bounced around. It's kind of a buzzword right now. But let's really dive into what it means. And really what co-production boils down to. It's working with a group rather than providing information for or about a group. So in the context of Ontario Shores, this could be doing work with our service users rather than for or about them. And a definition could be a relationship where professionals and citizens or service users, or whatever word we want to use, share power to plan and deliver support together, recognizing that both partners have vital contributions to make to improve the quality of life for people and communities. So the ultimate goal really of co-production is to bring about positive change for the individuals who we are doing work with. It can result in more relevant and impactful services and programs and support. And the process has so many benefits that Simone will touch on. But putting the service user voice at the forefront of all that we do can show that they are valued and respected. And co-production is a process in which individuals involved are equal partners in the design and delivery of supports and services. So the process of co-production recognizes people who use mental health services, supports, and programming, and their families as experts in their own experience and needs. Service users and their families have knowledge and experience that can be used to help make services more impactful, accessible, and relevant for themselves and their community. It really boils down to this: nothing about us without us. And this is the mantra of disability rights advocates fighting for self-empowerment and determination. Speaking as someone who's used services for mental health services for 16 of my 24 years, we know what's best for us, and we are experts in our own experience. So if you want things to be relevant and impactful to people like me and other service users, I think it's essential to engage the people who it will impact. So really, again, it boils down to positioning people with mental health challenges, people who identify as service users, consumers, ex-patients, survivors, position these people as the solution rather than the problem. And that's what co-production is all about.
Okay, so principles of co-production. So this goes beyond engagement. A lot of times we use the word, patient engagement. And usually what it boils down to is, okay, we've got some data, we've made an assumption about what is best, let's interpret this data, let's formulate a solution, let's run it by a patient and say we have engagement, right? And then we think, oh crap, why didn't that get traction, because a lot of times we make assumptions that are not correct. So principles of co-production are really looking at that process that we use, that engagement process, and taking it much further. So it's looking at these individuals, not pathologizing their lived experiences, it's enhancing them, it's leveraging them, it's recognizing expert by experience. So it's a very strength-based approach. It's building on people's capacities. And a lot of times, if you think about a mental health language, it's very disability laden, what you can't do. So you need to access benefits by highlighting what you cannot do, right? Which is actually, it's very stigmatizing, isn't it? So co-production looks at what you can do and recognizing that there's lots. It is mutual and it's give and take. So a lot of times, like Mike Slade, one of colleagues in the UK, he said, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So it's looking at that reciprocity and recognizing it's going to take time, but it's going to really lend itself to much better uptake down the road. Peer support is an excellent example of leveraging lived experience. For example, it's called Peer Connect Manitoba. It used to be called the Schizophrenia Society in Manitoba. They have lived experience at every single level of operation, from frontline all the way to the board of directors. And their executive director has lived experience. So you can imagine what that's like, what that does in terms of really getting people to leverage their lived experience and looking at roles. Like, so you're not a passive recipient of care. You are not, like pathologized. You are a service user who can help us. So we are empowering people to help us understand phenomena, to understand how to define issues and then corresponding solutions, right? Because a lot of times we make assumptions about the problems we don't even know, and so the solutions don't often map on. And then Holly touched on something that I hear all the time when we talk about co-production. Are you doing this for me or are you doing this with me? So it's not delivering things, it's not giving, it's not, as Holly said, it's mobilizing. And if you think about it, it's actually an effective use of lived experience, because now you can leverage lived experience to help co-facilitate as well. So you don't need to hire professionals all the time, right? So it's really thinking differently. And I have to tell you, I've done enough research with individuals with lived experience. Often when a professional tells someone to do something, or this might be helpful, they often think, what do you know about it, right? Like, you have your shit together, you know what you're doing. Like, why, how could you possibly tell me what I need, you know? So as Holly said, oftentimes using that lived experience is much more impactful because you have credibility, right? Anyway, so do you want to go to the next slide?
Yeah, and one thing, like just playing off what you just said, Simone, one thing that I've heard is like with this partnership, and it does add credibility having lived experience, because the analogy that I've heard is, would you trust someone who had never played soccer to coach you in soccer? You want that credibility that comes from that lived expertise. So thank you for bringing that in. Okay.
And this is me, right? Is this me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So in terms of research, right? I wanted someone who had lived experience because it would really enhance what I do. It enhances language, it enhances protocols and approaches, you know, because I mean, a lot of times people that I talk to don't even use the word recovery, right? So if I come in with all my language, my assumptions, and all of that, I think the work could be done much, much better. So you can include the lived experience lens in all phases. So I recruited for a lived experience co-investigator to help me. For example, in one of my projects, which is Holly, they can help with the strategic directions. We even ended up chunking research projects into 2 based on some of the recommendations that Holly brought and things like that. And then also, you know, in proper research, for sure, it's a value, but also in quality improvement. I think that's actually more, you know, it's kind of an applied research lens when you do quality improvement things or evaluation. Because, like, for example, who's working with me? Amanda Magurno and I are working on looking at the reduction of restraint and seclusion, right? And, you know, I've never been in restraint or seclusion. I've never had to put anyone in restraint or seclusion, right? So I'm really at a loss here. Like, I'm not, you know, probably the best person. So I'm asking, you know, this is human rights work. Can we bring in the voice of lived experience? Because this would enhance my work so much to understand this phenomenon. And by and large, yes, the answer was yes. So in quality improvement initiatives, for sure, I would suggest all the time that your work can be enhanced by incorporating lived experience. Did you want to go to the next? Okay, so the benefits associated, you know, when it's done properly, rather than, oh yeah, we asked a patient, you know, when it's done really properly, what it does, because we used to do things, and we still do, but we used to do things to people, right? So there's this inherent power imbalance, right? It really lessens that power imbalance. It puts everyone on the same playing field, bringing their own strengths. And when it's done well, all points of view are considered and really valued. And because we are using language of the service user, of the end user, right? Language, values, attitudes, right? Then we see that there's a more relevant and impactful solution. Like, for example, Larry Davidson, he's a brilliant Yale researcher in recovery. He did this transitional discharge program, and he, you know, wanted to get people into the community, but he found, why does everybody keep coming back to the hospital? Like, he thought he had a good program going, right? He recognized there was safety at the hospital. There was food at the hospital. The hospital was attractive. So these people kept coming back. And then he realized, okay, we have to work with these folks to make the community attractive. How do we do that, right? So we do make assumptions and we think, why isn't this working, right? So when you do that well, co-production, you really understand the values of your service users and how to align your initiatives with those values. Of course, there's a mutual respect there, right? When it's done well. it creates a shared vision. So you're talking about the same thing. So you both know what each other's referring to. So you know where each other is coming from. So that lessens sort of that miscommunication or misunderstanding. So you have a shared vision of what you both want to get out of something. And so then what that ends up doing is, because you're not pathologizing that lived experience, you're reducing stigma. You are saying, no, I value that lens. I value your experience, and you are an expert by experience. So the benefits of co-production cannot be overstated. Yes, it is more work, absolutely, but it is so much better. It's worth it for sure. Okay, so now I'm going to talk a bit about a project that Holly and I actually did. So just one example so you can access what that might look like in practice. So I got a bit of money from the Mental Health Commission to look at, when we talk about recovery, it's an adult model, really. Adults have designed it, we're in the research, etc. So what does that look like for adolescents? So we wanted to use co-design to engage adolescents to co-produce recovery research methodology and to look at recovery. So I'm not an adolescent, I haven't been one for a long time. So that's why I wanted someone like Holly to help me, because if I went in there, like, I don't even know how to approach young people, what language to use, etc. Do you want to go to the next slide? So this was our goal, was to develop an age and experience appropriate methodology for adolescents to help me use the language. Like, I'm certain they don't use the word recovery. How do I, get information that I can use using appropriate language? What is a good recruitment and compensation strategy for them, right? What I might like was not necessarily something, that young people like. And anyways, we won't go into how old I am, but anyway, so and how out of touch I am. I'm really out of touch. Like, I'm not even on social media. So Holly knows how out of touch I am. So this is what we wanted to do in order to inform the second part of our study, which would be to actually collect the data. So did you want to go to the next slide, Holly? So we wanted to know what makes you feel that someone has really listened to you. I wanted to make sure that Holly and I had that lens, had those behaviors. When do you feel understood? If you could choose a way to share your story, what would you use? How would you like to express yourself? Because, we were going to recruit folks that were in mental health facilities, right? So they're still working on their wellness, and I wanted them to feel like they could share. How could I enhance that, and do they use the word recovery, for example? So what we found, did you want to go to the next? Oh yeah, sorry. And I also added a couple other things. Being trauma informed, we wanted to know how could we make them feel safe as well. And then what could we give you to show our appreciation in terms of compensation? Because we did have a bit of money. What would they value in terms of that? And what would you want to tell me about the study to make you want to do it? Our consent forms can be so daunting sometimes, and the language we use. So it's kind of neat, actually. They said, you should put your pictures on the consent forms, so we know who you are, and we know what to expect. And when you see research, it can be like, oh, like, are you going to wear lab coats and all this? So we ended up doing that. We actually ended up putting our pictures on our consent form, which I thought was quite lovely, actually. Did you want to go to the next slide, Holly? Oh shoot, I didn't talk. Okay, go back up. So I do have some more results. Sorry, they were in the notes, but I thought it was in a slide. So what would make you feel safe? One thing, it's so interesting to me, because we sat down on at a table. They sat, I think sometimes we had one, sometimes we had two participants, and they said, this setup right here, we actually don't like. We'd like to be on the same side of the table as you. It would make us feel less subject-y, and I thought, oh wow, I never even thought of that. Also, sharing, can be a little anxiety provoking. So they said, I like we have fidget toys on the unit. Like, if we had fidget toys there to, just something to, distract us sometimes, or make it easier to share. And they also said, having a panel, like more than just the two of you wouldn't be good. Like, they don't want to feel, like a research subject. And then also they said, maybe ask where the person wants to meet. They may like to meet on the unit. They may not feel comfortable sharing. So it was kind of interesting. Some other things that we asked was, do you use the word recovery? They said, no, we don't. I don't like it. It makes me feel like a charity case. So we kind of wanted to ask, what would you like to use? So we just kept it broad and asked them to just share their story. We didn't ask it. And I don't know if you remember, Holly, we started off, we thought, okay, why don't we, because we didn't want to use the word recovery. So we got Holly to share her story first and said, what would you call that? And then we ended up learning they actually didn't like listening to Holly's story because it made them feel crappy about themselves because they felt, I'm not there yet. She's all good and whatever, and I'm not. And so we stopped doing that. I don't know if you remember that, Holly. I found that interesting
I do.
too. Yeah. And so we didn't do that anymore. And then we asked, how do you want to share your story? And so some wanted to draw, some wanted to do a video, some wanted to do a poster. So they said, bring art supplies, give them supplies and have them go away and come back. So we did all of those. We incorporated all of those things. And then of course, with the compensation, they're like, well, teenagers always love food. If you could have food there. I don't think we ended up actually doing that. We couldn't because we were also interviewing kids with eating disorders. So that wasn't a good idea. But they said gift cards. Gift cards to the Oshawa Center is great because you have access to a whole bunch of it. So that's actually what we ended up doing. So that is sort of a practical way that you can leverage lived experience to even produce your methodology, which I learned so much about young people, and Holly will share another example too, because she's also working with young folks, because it just helps you. It helps with recruitment strategy. It helps, with language and all of those things, which I think, so we were able to use some of those strategies to go to the second phase and get folks to share their stories. Do you want to go to the next slide?
Yeah, and one thing I loved about this project was how impactful the methodology ended up being in that second phase of the study. Young people found such creative ways to share their stories. So we gave them lots of options. So some people did graphic design. We had people write their story. We had people create images that represented their story. It was really impactful. And I think it was really meaningful for the service users as well. Simone, did you have anything else you wanted to say before we move on to post-secondary?
Nope.
Okay. So my role right now is I am one of the leads for bringing post-secondary recovery colleges into existence, really. So we have a recovery college here at Ontario Shores, but I'll give a brief overview of what a recovery college is. So recovery colleges aim to provide educational opportunities on a range of topics that support positive mental well-being. And when we're talking about recovery, we're talking about personal recovery. So living a purposeful and meaningful life, despite the presence of mental distress, no matter how frequent or severe. So it is applicable to everyone because, as we know, we are all have experiences of mental health and mental distress at one time or another, some more frequent, some more severe. But with the emergence of young adulthood, this is often when mental health challenges emerge as well. And the needs of this population has been exacerbated by the pandemic. So this is more applicable now than ever to bring this type of programming to post-secondary institutions. Recovery colleges, again, are inclusive and open to everyone, and they operate on these principles of CHIME. So through a synthesis of narratives from people with lived experience, the things that have been really impactful in influencing people's wellness are connection, hope, identity, meaning, and empowerment. And these are the facets that recovery colleges aim to influence through educational programming about mental health. It's not therapy, it's not clinical. So you might have a class about CBT, but it wouldn't be CBT, it wouldn't be therapy. Or you could have a Caribbean cooking class or guitar or other things like that, where you are maximizing your identity outside of mental distress and finding interests and passions to facilitate resilience and wellness. So this is brand new to the post-secondary space. So co-design was such a great fit for this project because we don't know how this can be applied to the post-secondary students' needs. So we took a very robust approach to making sure that the student voice was at the center and forefront of this movement. So we started with a mental health needs assessment. So we consulted mental health and wellness related clinicians and staff at the universities. But I would argue more importantly, we consulted the students. What needs are you seeing in yourself and peers that aren't being met? And then this information was used to inform some co-production events and methodologies. So I will really dive into what this process of co-production looked like. And students really helped us build what these recovery colleges are in the post-secondary space and develop some courses that are so meaningful, so impactful and relevant to this population. So I'll tell you a little bit about this co-production, what this co-production process looked like. So for each of the 3 schools we're working at right now, with hopes of expanding in the future, we're working with McMaster, University of Toronto Scarborough campus, and Ontario Tech. We ran co-production events at each of these post-secondary institutions. So we put out a call to students, if you're interested in developing post-secondary recovery college curriculum, come join us for an hour or an hour and a half. And we discussed opportunities to create courses that really spoke to the core of student life as a post-secondary student and how recovery college courses could help students navigate so many of the challenges that they see in themselves and others. And these sessions were designed leveraging Simone and my previous experience doing co-design and also guidance from the Canadian Mental Health Association and other scholarly sources. And they were semi-structured. So we really wanted it to be an organic discussion about what the students needed and what they wanted to see out of this programming. So sessions were initiated with a series of introductions. So we got to know each other, we got comfortable, and I facilitated these. And I'm a post-secondary student right now, so I was really coming at it as a peer. So I gave a quick introduction to the purpose of the session, why we're here, what a recovery college is, what is this umbrella that we're working under, and then also the purpose of graphic facilitation, which is I'll get into a bit later, but this was a way in which we amended typical co-design approaches to be relevant and impactful to this specific population. So we talked a little bit about that, and then not just the courses for the recovery college were designed in this session, but really our approach. How are we going to go about promoting this offering? And how can we make it accessible to the diversity of students at your institution? And the overall goal was to amplify and put the student voice at the forefront of everything that we were doing in this recovery college. We did a little comfort agreement, just outlining, just to make sure everyone felt comfortable sharing the space. And students actually helped co-design this as well. We worked together to develop mutual expectations for the session. And then at this point, the graphic facilitator began recording this discussion. So the students were presented with course ideas to react to. So at Ontario Tech, we had run a couple semesters. So we said, here are the courses we've run before. Are these still relevant? Are they more relevant, less relevant? And if they're still relevant, how can we update them to be increasingly impactful? And this, I think, was a really important piece because, as we know, the world has changed a lot in the past year. So there were some really insightful tweaks that the students wanted to make, but our large overall consensus was that these courses were still impactful. And for schools that had new recovery colleges, we presented them some ideas that came out of that needs assessment and said, would a course on this be relevant? And if they were asked to flesh out ideas for resources, content, discussion, course titles. They named the courses, activities. How do we want to engage in this material? Is it open discussion? Is it semi-structured curriculum? Is it fully structured curriculum? They were also asked logistical questions related to session length, number of sessions, timing. So every detail was designed by these students. And then after they reacted to a couple, I left the door open and said, if you could create your dream course, what would that look like? And the way I kind of think about it is when we were kids, do you remember getting that big Sears catalog and going through and circling what you wanted for Christmas? It's kind of like that. You get the sky is the limit. And it's something to be really excited about. So they designed some brilliant courses. And then the most difficult part was at the end when I asked them to rank their ideas, because we can't run 30 courses for our first semester. So we said, what are your top two? And that is what we based our semester off of. So just going back to this graphic facilitation piece, traditional methods of recovery college co-production. Co-production is one of the pillars of recovery colleges. All sessions are and course materials and everything about recovery college is co-produced by the people who are going to access it. The typical kind of approach to co-production used in recovery colleges was thoughtfully amended to ensure the application to this new population was effective. And including graphic facilitation gives students the platform to speak up, be heard, and see that their voices are reflected in a visual story, of the discussion that will be shared, discussed, and developed. And with this global pandemic and doing these type of workshops in a virtual space, making connections with others and sharing ideas is a little bit more challenging. So graphic facilitation helped dismantle these barriers inherent in virtual discussions. So this is one of them. So beautiful. I love looking at this. In addition to the benefits of feeling heard and validated in the moment, these graphics were used for promotion of this offering to highlight that the student voice is central to this work. And it was also used later at a member checking event. So basically what happens is we have that an hour co-production event, and then I took that away. And as a post-secondary student myself, the student voice was completely preserved. And I took their ideas away and I fleshed out sessions. I fleshed out a 6-week course based on their ideas. And then a couple weeks later, I went back to them and we got together again, which was a lovely little reunion. And I said, is this what you meant? Is this representative of our discussion? Is there anything that you think of now that could make this content more impactful, more meaningful? And this is something that I don't think has been done before, this member checking piece, in terms of recovery college co-production, but the students felt heard, they felt validated, they were excited to see their ideas come to life. They had some really insightful ideas for additional activities and things like that. But it was a really amazing process. And the one other thing is we had McMaster actually had a group of students who wanted to be involved in fleshing out these sessions. And so I met with them on a weekly basis and we did that process together. And the ideas that the students had were amazing. So I've given you a couple of seconds to look at this graphic. So the 2 courses that we are running this semester this is Ontario Tech's, are We to Wellness 2.0. So We to Wellness is a course on anxiety as a post-secondary student that we've run before, but it has been updated to reflect the current situation and also anxiety around COVID and things like that. We're also running a course called Let's Talk About It, Adulting 101. And this is a course about stress. Stress is something that students are struggling with that they identified. And the things that they wanted to learn about were, what is stress? How do I manage it? And they wanted to learn about mindfulness and self-care. So we're running the We to Wellness right now. We're starting Let's Talk About It, Adulting 101 in a couple of weeks. But I can't tell you how meaningful that the students are finding this curriculum. This is the one from UTSC. And we are running a course at UTSC called The Self-Discovery Journey. And this course is really interesting. So the first week we talk about connection during COVID. Students are feeling really, really isolated. This isn't what they expected out of their post-secondary experiences. And those who are in upper years are mourning the university life that they once had and those connections. So making connections, sustaining connections, and also that idea of going back to normal and being in a room and having to do small talk is really quite daunting for a lot of students. So we did a friend mixer last week where we got in breakout rooms and we practiced small talk. I gave them some prompts so they had some things to work off of, but that was a really cool activity that students suggested. Tomorrow we're talking about advocacy, then we're talking about wellness planning, resiliency, and diversity. So these are topics that students wanted to learn about. And the last but not least, we have McMaster. So again, I met with these students on a weekly basis to form 2 courses that kind of were born at this co-production event. So the first one is Community Connect, and this really speaks to the fact like students are feeling really isolated. But this course is really cool. Students want to practice their social skills and get together and practice connecting, making new friends. So we're having game night, movie night. We're doing speed friending, which is kind of like speed dating, but speed friending. We're talking about boundaries, how to have relationships that feel comfortable and are meaningful to you. And then the next one is Skills for Daily Living, which we're going to be starting in a couple of weeks. But this is largely a course students, as young adults, we're expected to know a lot of things that we're never taught. And this discrepancy between what we're expected to know and what we feel prepared to do can be really distressing. So we're going to talk about laundry, household chores, finances, all of these things that can seem really overwhelming. And we're going to figure them out together. And I think that's really powerful. So the use of graphic facilitation was so impactful in enhancing group cohesion and the sense of community amongst participants. Students felt heard and validated. And here are some beautiful things we heard from students about it. One student recalled that they felt that all of their ideas were heard and accepted, and watching them being jotted down in real time was really cool as well. So we actually had a graphic facilitator attend these co-design events, and there was a video as part of the Zoom call where you could see her creating the graphic in real time, which was awesome. It also enhanced the sense of community. One student told me that it was a vibe, and students used the chat feature on Zoom as well as verbal communication to encourage each other and validate their peers. And they used the graphic as a method of recalling previous elements of the conversation, kind of grounding the discussion. Students also found the live graphic depiction of the conversation engaging. This is amazing work. This is so impressive, so artistically inclined. The visual depiction is amazing. It's truly beautiful. And this just goes to show that the graphic facilitation was an effective tool in ensuring the conversation was relevant to our objective, which was to highlight the student voice, and the students felt that. And the co-design events, co-production events in all were a hit. So students said such lovely things. It's so much easier for students such as myself to get help when the support is positive and welcoming. People really enjoyed it. They can see it helping a lot of students. This is going to be what UTSC needs. And that one really stuck with me. This is going to be what UTSC needs because the students designed it. The students know what they need. They are experts in their own experience. They are experts navigating their wellness through their post-secondary career. So who better to ask than them? Maybe I'll pause there for a second and just see if there's any questions about the post-secondary co-design process. I know it's a big one. Any thoughts? Okay, that's okay. I just also wanted to highlight that the system is recognizing how important it is to engage service users in research, program development, support, planning, all of these things. And funders are pivoting for it. They're putting their money where their mouth is. They really are. And a case example is CIHR, Canadian Institute of Health Research, one of 3 Canadian government funding agencies for research. And they've created the strategy for patient-oriented research. And this is so in line with co-design. So their guiding principles for this strategy are inclusiveness. Patient engagement and research integrates a diversity of patient perspectives, and research is reflective of their contributions. Support. Adequate support and flexibility are provided to patient participants to ensure they can contribute fully to discussions and decisions. They highlight creating safe environments that promote honest interactions, cultural competence training and education. And also they highlight compensating individuals for this work and for their lived experience. They also talk about mutual respect, which Simone talked a little bit about earlier. Researchers, practitioners, and patients acknowledge and value each other's expertise and experiential knowledge. There's multi-way capacity building and co-building, which is really what co-design is all about. It's co-building services and programs and research together. And we want to, the goal of the strategy for patient-oriented research is to transform the role of a service user from a passive receptor to a proactive partner who helps shape health research and as a result, healthcare. And they are our partners. So I think that that is really, really powerful. And it's so exciting for me as a service user to know that one of the the Tri-Council agencies really as a whole, as the main funders in Canada, are recognizing the importance of highlighting voices of people like me. So that is really exciting for me. So this is Simone. I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, I think, you know, we highlighted all the ways in which you can engage in co-production, right? And so it's just as you would any other stakeholder group, include the service users as the experts, right? They can help with your understanding of the phenomenon, so the idea generation and then the corresponding protocol development. Of course, you heard how they could, recruitment could be better. You heard about, for example, putting our pictures on the consent form and things like that. And they can even, you know, assist with data collection and everything. So I don't think I need to go into this too, but also closing the loop as well. I wanted to highlight in terms of dissemination. And this is also why, you know, we have the Journal of Recovery and Mental Health is to leverage the lived experience voice equally with the research conducted by professionals, right? Because again, this experts by experience should have platforms to disseminate their work. So our journal is an excellent example of that.
It is an excellent example. And I really enjoy being the lived experience editor on that journal. And because I'm so passionate about highlighting of the voice of lived experience, and I think the journal does a great job of doing that. Simone, again.
Oh, says me. Yeah, and to the extent that you guys are wanting to, we thought we could also provide this as a forum to talk about the ways in which, you know, because we've got some researchers here, et cetera, how can you apply co-design in your work? Or if you have any questions or if you wanted to share anything, we'll just open it up for discussion.
I'm going to stop the share so I can see everyone's face, if that's okay.
Mm-hmm. So I did want to acknowledge Kim's question. She asked if we included mature students. I know you did have one attend. We weren't and I just wrote here, we didn't target them specifically, but however, like we are just starting, right? And when we launch recovery colleges, we always start small and do it well and then expand. So I sort of said, that's not to say we don't foresee the evolution of the college, including courses targeted for mature students, or even we heard international students, for example, or some, like what we are hearing is students are really anxious about the transition from post-secondary to jobs, right? So targeting those later in their university tenure, like students, to help them plan. So you can, and that's why co-production is so great. You engage those folks to help tell us what you're worried about, what you want to learn, and then they co-produce the curriculum, and then you're targeting those groups. So I do probably foresee the college evolving in that way.
And that's another thing I've seen is I have a couple of groups that have mature students in them. And the recovery college is open to everyone. And one of the beautiful things I actually see by integrating new students coming straight out of high school and mature students, they have so much to learn from each other. And we highlight those connections, and we highlight that different connections can serve different purposes in your life. Maybe this person isn't going to be your best friend, but maybe you really have meaningful connections with them during our course, or maybe they will be your best friend. And it's really highlighting that we all have things that we can learn from each other. I see Mark has his hand up.
And I love it.
I just have a quick question more about the language used. Just interested in your feedback on it. Something I've noticed specifically working in mental health is the first barrier, almost regardless of the patient, to kind of cross is but addressing the guilt associated with a diagnosis. So it's, I don't have a mental illness for ABC reasons. Tying that into the language used, I'm noticing that you guys are using the words service user instead of patient. So my question would be, is changing the language, I think keeping the language, I'm trying to think how to say this right. I think keeping the language the same as a patient helps alleviate some of that guilt that the person has associated with being a patient themselves and receiving treatment. Sort of like how you wouldn't ask somebody with a broken leg to come and do a 10K run with you, but you would ask somebody with depression because you don't have a physical indicator. That person with depression might not feel, am I sick enough to avoid this responsibility? I think keeping the terms in like patient kind of allows people to sit into that role and receive treatment with less guilt associated with it, if that makes sense.
It totally makes sense. And I think this is an excellent topic, right? Because sometimes it's like, I have this thing, it's a real thing, I have a diagnosis and it's a thing. I do hear a lot of guilt and shame associated with mental health. I hear it on the part of the person with the diagnosis, and a lot of times the parents as well. But it's kind of funny. I'm not going to answer this question. I am going to ask someone who actually has lived experience, and I'm going to get, because this is the thing, you will get a different answer probably from anyone you ask. So Holly, yep. I don't know. What is your thought on that?
Yeah, I think that language, like I could talk about language all day. I did my master's in critical disabilities, and I would say probably 10 pages of my major research paper were talking about language. So the word patient, and again, like Simone said, it's going to be different for everyone. So the best way is to ask how a person wants to be addressed. Do they feel comfortable being referred to as patient? For me, my experience with my peers, other people who have lived experience, sometimes we don't like the word patient because patient is often indicates that we are broken, we are ill, and a lot of people with mental health challenges or people who are accessing services, however they want to identify, yes, maybe I need some support, but I am not broken. I do not need fixing. This is my human experience. And people have different relationships with the system. Many people have been harmed by the system. So I think in order to, language is tricky, but the way to get around it is to ask people how they want to be addressed. And something, I think service user is safe to refer to someone who uses services, because you're not indicating that you are assuming that they are sick, but you know that they are using services. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks.
Okay. Well, and I think too, because I think about the language as well. I know a lot of times people use the word consumer, and maybe that makes sense in the States or but in Canada, I don't think so. A consumer to me denotes that you have choices and you are deciding where you're going. And I think in Canada, we don't. I'm grateful that our healthcare is funded, but you get what you get, right? So I don't prefer that word here, but in other places people do use that word as well. So language is, I'm so glad you brought it up, Mark, because it is worth having that conversation, because I don't know the answer.
And I just always found it.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, but I was just gonna say, I always found it kind of gave people a kind of a safe place to retreat to not to say I'm trying to choose my language carefully, not to say that somebody's broken, but to accept I have limitations. Like if I have I'll use myself as an example, actually, that's safest. I got diagnosed with ADD later in life, about 33. Man, I would have really liked to know that I had ADD a little bit earlier to say, okay, maybe I'm not just lazy. Maybe I'm not just doing everything wrong in comparison to everybody else. I have ADD, I've got these challenges.
Mm-hmm. And I think one thing, and I think that speaks to the diversity of experiences, because I know a lot of people who wouldn't say that there are limitations associated with their mental health challenge, or or they have been diagnosed with a mental health challenge, but don't identify with it. They don't accept that label. And I think the nuances of language in this kind of area are highlighted by even the name of the movement of service users, the consumer/survivor/ex-patient movement. Like, we couldn't even decide on a name because there's so many nuances in terms of how people identify, and mental health experiences are so diverse and everyone's experiences of it is different. And the language reflects that, the fact that there's no consensus.
And
Thanks, guys.
while you're here, Mark, because I've been meaning to catch up with you, I just want to say, I love your idea for staff peer support. I did the survey. I think it's great. I'm not sure where it's at, but I think that was such a great idea.
Agreed.
Awesome. Thanks. Thank you for taking the question too.
Any other questions?
So I just want to close then by saying, I know we have co-production action plans, and for me though, honestly, it's just a mindset. It's a shift in your mind. It's not heavy. It's just, you don't need all, it's just recognize the benefits and incorporate and business as usual with that person, same as you. That's it, really. It's a flick of a switch, right? You don't need tons of education to do it well. Okay. Okay, done, right?
Thank you, Holly. Thank you, Simone. That's a great presentation. Thanks very much.
Okay, thanks, guys.